Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first question and answer from the new Patreon. And first, I want to say thanks very much to everyone who's asked questions. We'll try to get through all of the questions that have come in on Patreon, and we'll be doing more of these to try and keep up with them. But wow, a lot of questions, a lot of great questions and comments. Very much appreciate that. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, I probably won't get any YouTube questions this time because so many on Patreon. Occasionally, if I have time, I will try to get to those, but we're going to focus on the Patreon questions first. So thanks to everyone who's come over and signed up, and we want to get to your questions now. So, all right, Jeremy, welcome. Good evening.
Hey, Wes.
Yeah, let's go. Shoot, boy, I haven't even looked at all these questions. There's so many good ones. So here we go.
Yeah, the first questions are from House of the Intellect, and the first question is from Carter, who's talking about his time working at McDonald's as a young person and feeling like they were kind of on a conveyor belt, kind of a feeling. And then now as an adult working in data entry and also feeling a little bit like they're on a conveyor belt. So Carter says, below my low quality content diet, your discussion of working with dignity and integrity in different settings resonates with me. As silly as it may sound, I still take some pride in the work I did at McDonald's drive-through window, where I was the only staff member at the location who could simultaneously take orders, make change, and clean trays all at the same time. In contrast, my current job function as a data entry robot is especially mind-numbing. I get the feeling that I'm killing my brain. I'm not working with dignity. I'm not working with integrity. The aspects of my job that I take the most pride in are the smallest, least common parts of my job. It was clear before that I needed change, but after this talk, it's especially clear.
Well, I think this is a great point because we so often associate respect and success, I guess, in its many degrees with positions. With an external facing, like, oh, this person is doing something that looks status filled, rather than what the person is actually doing and the quality of the work that they do. So as I always say, I've talked to parents. I'm sure we've all seen this. People go, oh, they want their kids to work at Google, and I'm never convinced anybody knows what anybody does at Google. I mean, somebody must know, but a lot of people don't know. It just sounds good. Like they just could be at Google torturing kittens to death all day, and they're like, oh, I want my kids to do that because it pays a lot and they get respect. And so rather than saying, oh, like, yeah, you could work with integrity at a drive-through window, you can have a good experience of that, you can like that. No, you're not allowed to like that. We're told you're not an important person, even though obviously a lot of people want to go through drive-through windows and get good service, right? It's the most frustrating that we simultaneously want it for us. We want to receive that good service, that integrity, that person who's really executing for us. And yet we would never want often ourselves or the people, our children or our friends, like, oh no, that would be terrible. We would never want to do that. And I think that, if you've articulated perfectly clearly, it's how you do things and what in the environment you're working in that matter. It's not, you can do a great job at a drive-through, you can do a crap job. You can do a great job in construction, you can do a crap job. You can do a great job in the classroom at a university, you can do a crap job. Right. And so, but it really helps if you're in an institution or in an environment that encourages that, because a lot of places just rob that of you. And when you see people at work, sometimes you realize, like, oh, yeah, this person is being terrible. They aren't helping me. They aren't doing whatever. But it's not really them. It's that they feel hostage to this environment. And so I tend not to get so angry as I just feel bad for people. So yeah, I think you've articulated it very well in that. That comment. It's a great comment.
Yeah. And in Patreon, you were asking people to share examples of feeling isolated and isolated from the community of the House of the Intellect. And Ty articulates something that goes along with that. He says, I think I'm lacking in the dignity department. Even writing this comment is difficult because I don't feel like anything I say would be of much value. Still, I really want to explore my ideas and the ideas of others. And then he continues to say, he really wants to write something that everyone will like and feel like is great, but it's an unhelpful idea because it inhibits him from writing much at all. It's like he wants to write the great novel, or this person's a philosophy major right now, but feels pressure to write something great. And in terms of talking with other people about ideas, he says most discussions I have are with professors whom I feel there's little I could discuss that would be mutually insightful to them. And people who care about Thai could care less about the subjects being discussed. And he feels like he has to catch them up so that they can have a good conversation, but it's ineffective. And it says it's done out of sheer desperation for discussion of topics that interest him. So this is an experience of struggling to find the kind of home, the house of the intellect.
Yeah, so a couple of points. So one is, like you say, learning to think that you have valuable things to say. I mean, it's tough again because what we're told is you're going to either say right things or wrong things, right? So usually we're judged as right or wrong rather than personally important. And then there's a whole notion of originality, like, we somehow we have both the notion of originality and that it needs to be judged on existing criteria for right and wrongness, right? So, this is a paradoxical and impossible thing to fulfill. But we realize pretty quickly that people say they want originality, they have no interest in originality. But one of the things that was very helpful for me, and speaking of writing in particular on this, is I had to overcome the academic writing sensibility, which is very defensive, and I think it's just mind-numbing, mind-deadening. And the way I did that is wrote something that I just felt, half of me felt was really stupid, right? And so that notion of like, it's okay to be stupid, it's okay to be wrong. What's not okay is it's not okay to be untrue to yourself. And I finally realized that I wanted to write and think and speak more like me. Right. It sounds as a weird goal, but as much as possible, I wanted to try and articulate things that I felt were important and were true while being open. Kaufman has a great phrase, strong convictions lightly held. And it's not going, I'm right, I know everything, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I think this might be helpful and insightful. I could be wrong, and people could help and inform me otherwise, and that would be great too. And then you're in that dialogue. But it is difficult because, again, university, as I mentioned in the series, like where you think you would be great. Well, the professors are all there often with little time. They got stressed. They're trying to do things. They're trying to get your papers graded. Like, do they really have time to engage with you? Other people are doing other things. Do they have the background? And so for me, which again, I'm in a country where I don't speak the language. So I'm feeling this doubly difficult, that doubly challenging. I would ponder ways to articulate your insights, thoughts, and ideas outside of the strictly technical, which I think is one of the things that we're misled. Is if you go, Schopenhauer makes some great idea, or Camus or Heidegger or somebody, whoever, that Taoism, that Lao Tzu is making some point, and go, how can I extrapolate that into people's everyday experiences, into something that they've most likely encountered? And then if you can get it from that point, then usually people really do have insightful things to say, even though they can't articulate it within that specifically philosophical framework. But it is a challenge, and it is really nice when you meet somebody or can spend time with someone who's read the books and has the background, and your vocabulary is there, and it's like, it's great. You just feel liberated. You're like, right. Yeah, finally, yay. But there's other ways too. But but learning to value your voice, and it's valuable because it's yours. I mean, that's one of the most challenging things, because we're told that it's getting the right answer. A, B, C, or D, and this has nothing to do with your voice. It has nothing to do with you. Finally, it's an example that always comes to me is, you go, there's no one can ever read and know everything. So it's an infinite amount out there, roughly speaking, relative to our capacity. So everybody is mostly ignorant of mostly everything because it's such a big world, right? And yet somehow we feel very disabled by that. And two, we all have to learn to kiss. Now, people have kissed before, right? But we have to kiss for the first time. We have to learn to kiss. We have to, that experience has to be held by us, or else it's not meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And so the value of it is for the individual and comes from the individual.
Mm-hmm.
But as I mentioned in the lecture, that's more subjective than the qualitative stuff that we really like.
Right. No, I think that's good advice. Making it personal.
Yeah, as much as possible.
Daniel is a former dentist who practiced 20 years ago, but now is a surfer. And he says, my interests in college were literature, art, history, and the humanities. Science and math were a means to an end. Having played high school and college sports, and as an avid lifelong surfer, I have few friends who share my intellectual interests. A comment about the life of Rimbaud, Wittgenstein, Pollock, or Orwell, let alone their work, would be poorly received by my Saturday morning good old boys, the Wave Masters, at our breakfast gathering. I love these guys.
Yeah, there it is, right? Yep. And then again, this is the deep cultural difficulty of, if you really like sports, if you're into athletics, we're told, oh, well, you're not a serious intellect. You can't be smart. And it's just that people always say, oh, you must have been really good in school. And it's like, not, my brother, he got a 4.0. He had a better high school GPA than I did by far, and a better college GPA than I did by far. And he just played football. He never read a book in his life, but he was really good at the school thing, and he was really good at the football thing. He mostly just loves football. And it's like, and people can go, oh, well, your football brother, he's kind of dumb. I'm like, no, he's really smart. Like he knows things. He just loves football. And so, yeah, so one, there is this, our society, and I would say in defense of your friends, I don't know if it's in defense of, but they may feel like they feel threatened, right? Because they've been told, oh, because we're these kind of people, we're not into that. We don't care about that, right? And so it's a double wall, because you're interested in it, and they've been told that they're not supposed to be interested in it. So most of them probably haven't pursued this or gone after that. But then if you go and find a group of people who are, bookish and all this, often they have this contempt for athletes and athletics. And they're like, oh, those are a bunch of jocks, and those are those other people. And yes, this is part of this unfortunate division of our culture. And it is more prominent, by the way, in the United States than in other places. I was just reading, he's a Belgian author. I think he writes mostly in French, but I think he also writes in German. Anyway, one of these European guys. But he was also, I think, the French heavyweight boxing title champion, right? He has no neck. He's like, he looks like a heavyweight boxer, because a guy without a neck. But he's won all the prizes. He's won the prize at Goncourt. He's a playwright. He's done all this stuff. And in France, we're like, oh yeah, boxer. And, writer, that seems good. And in America, like, no, boxers are dumb. We know that. They can't also write, great literature. So, yeah, I don't know how to get around that, except for surfing, oddly, seems to attract very philosophical people. There seems to be something about surfing that makes people reflective. Maybe it's just floating out in the ocean so much of the time. So it would seem to me, if any sport is likely to have people to chat with, maybe I would have suspected it was surfing, but I'm probably wrong again. But yeah, don't abandon hope. All you go there. Just keep trying. I say force them to hear the anecdotes and hear the stories, and maybe eventually they'll just keep yelling at you, or they'll eventually go, oh, okay, all right, I'm going to read The Myth of Sisyphus, because for so long, or watch the movie. Is there a movie, The Myth of Sisyphus? There probably is.
So for people like Ty and Daniel who are looking for kind of a salon in a world where there are no salons, do you think it's a good idea to kind of try to draw people in, or to maybe do some work on your own to speak to them more from a personal point of view yourself, instead of just kind of starting with, hey, let's talk about Wittgenstein?
Yeah. Well, yeah. What started the hey baby, let's talk about Wittgenstein. That's turned out not to be a very good pickup line. So in general, but yeah, I think both I think are true. One, just like we were talking about earlier. Speak truly to yourself. If you think it's important and matters, let's say it, right? But in a way that they can hear it. If you're saying it in ways that other people can't hear, then it's just not helpful, and it will create that wall.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it is important to be, proactive, to say, okay, I can surf and hang out with these guys in the morning, but I need to maybe shop around and try and find another community, other people, someone who are more like this. Although, again, I made the series specifically because I think it is so incredibly difficult for us in this world that we inhabit today to have these conversations, to have these experiences. So, yeah, so I both agree with you, but I don't know what else to do, except I would say, repeat what I said earlier, which is the more you speak truly to yourself, I think the better off you'll be. Yeah.
Right on. So Jeremy Hunter asks a question about art and isolation. So one area in which I've found a progressive isolation and alienation is in my difficulty finding real-world art and music communities. Sometimes it seems like an artist or a musician's main vocation is less to explore their own creative vision, but to build an online community siloed around their own work. As someone who has been a part of thriving communities in the past, it's obvious to me that likes and views and streaming are such an impoverished replacement for real life experiences with other people. The problem is that there are very few other ways to find an audience. To them, not being on social media is akin to not existing. But I'm not sure if these people see how much the medium of social media structures their creative output. I suppose this links to anti-intellectualism, that the deep and profound value of thought-reflective art disappears in this kind of fast-paced, novelty-attuned, attention-seeking medium. It also de-incentivizes a long, slow gestation of artistic ideas.
Yeah, the medium is the message. Hello, you can argue with McLuhan about a lot of things, but that was he had some very clear ideas, and one is yes, and I will say yes here on Patreon, right here on YouTube,
Right.
So I feel that very much. Like, where are those communities? I've been fortunate that I have inhabited those communities for a long time. I've been lucky in that way. But I say community, I do mean it's like a dozen people, right? Like, so it's not like I'm surrounded by hundreds of people. I've just been consistently surrounded by 5 or 6 or 7 people at a time, pretty much my entire adult life, who have made me feel like I was immersed in an environment where all of this mattered in some ways. So I feel, I feel fortunate in that way. But 2 is, just what you articulated, the value of live interaction is so great. The question before, talking about being with his friends for coffee, right? Surfing chat, right? There it is, right? That's that community. But in that case, he doesn't feel like it's intellectual community. But finding those places, finding those artists who do not allow it to completely shape their work, I think it's difficult because, but as the person articulated, the artists are all told, like, look, if you aren't getting the clicks and the likes and the follows, then you don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
That it's such a weird message, but if you talk to people, then you will find out you get so much better feedback. I mean, absolutely better. I mean, there's, again, one reason I'm doing this and have a place in France where I'm going to be able to hold classes and have seminars and have space to do that, is because it's like so frustrating and such a challenge to get people together and have a place where these sorts of interactions can take place. So I agree, and I feel the pain, but I would say don't give up. Keep looking, keep searching, keep trying. Because I also think it's winter, spring, summer, fall, right? Like, communities start, they're doing well, things happen, they break up, they burn out, they go away. Bands are a good example, right? Bands get together, they make a couple albums, they fight, they break up, they go into rehab, they get back together, right? And I think any sort of group, human, communal activity is going to have some element of that. And so they aren't stable or long-standing, perhaps. Sometimes they are, but I think often that they're not. So, yeah, I wish there was a better answer than that, but I don't think there is. I think you articulated the problem quite clearly. And it does, by the way, absolutely influence production, because, a really good writer writing at a fair clip can turn out a novel, every 3 or 4 years seems to be what most, really hardworking, professional style, high-end novelists, one click every 4 years is not going to do it. Right. So that you've got, so this is, so you're told, like, the publishers tell you everything else. Everybody tells you this, but but it doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it good. It doesn't make it helpful and life fulfilling to have all that. And so we really are, which is part of the reason for the House of the Intellect series. And I think, pay attention to series 5, which will be, I just recorded it today, will be coming up in a couple of 2 weeks, because I think 3 is out now, because it addresses this very specific issue.
Marcia asked a question about Ivy League kids not being able to read. You mentioned that in House of the Intellect, and Marcia has a theory about it. And her theory is that the wealthy folks who send their kids to Ivy League schools are cultural Philistines who value money, the procreation drive, sports, and crass pursuits, and possess a deep aversion to high culture. And basically, it is a pretty harsh kind of indictment, and I just wonder if you kind of agree that there's something going on that's specific to kind of like a low culture in the highest levels of education.
Yes, I think Marcia, although notice the attack on sports there that we were just talking about, right? And this is why the one reason I love the Greeks is because if you read Plato's Socratic dialogues, I think half of them, maybe more than half of them, also Xenophon's, happen either at the gym, on the way back from the gym, or on the way to the gym. This is all the Greeks were doing. Now they are either on the way to, or back from the gymnasium. Like this is where Greek society took place. So there is no necessary distinction, and in fact, I think it's an artificial distinction our society has created between these kinds of pursuits and intellectualism. However, I do think her larger point is spot on, and Barzan actually points this out. I don't know if it's in the House of the Intellect, though. I believe it is in a different work, but maybe it is House of the Intellect now that I think about it. So intellectualism, being really like caring about your own thoughts, about your own introspection, about your personal integrity and dignity, necessarily sets you apart, right? Because you're saying, like, this is, and I want to be with other people who feel this way. And if your achievement is primarily status and monetary, what you hate, what you really, really hate, is to have something that you can't buy your way into, right? Where somebody doesn't go, oh, look, there's no price tag, right? It's not right. Money can help a little bit, give you some free time, right? That's access to education. Like, so that's definitely possible. But now over the generations that have developed, there is this clear sense that they loathe any kind of barrier that is not functionally addressed through money or the kind of status they have. And so when they're presented with, like, oh, well, this even informal club or group or this area of culture is open to anybody who has read these books, thought about this art, listened to this music, and had these experiences, please come in. They're like, no, I just want to give you $1,000. And it's like, well, no, that's an irrelevant. They're like, no, but my scorekeeping is that I've made $1 million or $100 million or $1 billion, like whatever. And I'm in this position. It's like, well, these are all irrelevant. And the perfect example of this, which I've mentioned before, I think in a lecture, was there was a golf course on Long Island, New York, that was private, but you could not buy your way in. It was members voted you in, and it was an old vestigial golf course that had been around for a long time. So it was like had Supreme Court justices and had I think Prince of Wales, I think, was a member, right? So it had some Nobel laureate authors. So it had this, collection of, generally wealthy, but overeducated, but achievement people.
Mm-hmm.
And then as New York boomed and the money came in and all the hedge fund money, they moved into this area. And the fact that they could not play at the golf course drove them insane, so much so that they tried to get the golf course condemned.
Mm.
So that they tried to make it public, so that they had to allow them to be members because of public course, and that didn't work. Then they tried to get it condemned, even though it had been there for some ridiculous amount of time. And so this notion that you're going to have a barrier that is not amenable to the achievements that I have is frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is back to the surfing question, where if people feel like, oh, you're using language I don't know, I'm going to feel uncomfortable and feel that as an attack, right? Their response is to put their hackles up and to, again, not receive it well. And this is one of the problems with the House of the Intellect. It is kind of by nature exclusionary, not exclusionary by the sense of the barrier to participation is not within your control. It's that, if you haven't done these things, then if you haven't read the books or thought about it, it makes it hard to participate. If you're not this kind of person and pursuing this, it makes it difficult. And yes, I do think there is a strong, I've felt it very strongly personally, the bias against this. They really do dislike anybody telling them like, oh, no, you're fine. You're doing great. Like, you've got all this money. Yay for you being wealthy. However, this table is reserved for people who have, for some stupid reason, read Wittgenstein, right? There's a lot of empty chairs, but you don't get one, right? And so they just So I do think this is accurate, and I'm sure people have felt versions of this in their own lives.
And Marcia has a follow-up about kids, and she says many members of the intelligentsia are unable to afford to have children, or choose not to have children for various reasons. Have you noticed how a disproportionate number of philosophers, from Kant to Schopenhauer to Spinoza to Nietzsche, did not have children? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is also culturally specific, because, a lot of the Hindu thinkers had lots of kids. And, so this also, a lot of Chinese thinkers would have kids, and then in older age, they basically retire. And then we're done with all that. And now we're going to go on and be, Taoist sages or whatever. So, but yeah, there has been this tradition, sort of almost medieval scholastic tradition. Oxford and Cambridge, you used to have to be a priest to teach at Oxford and Cambridge, and priests used to not be able to be married, right? Like there was a prohibition against this, either by code or by strong tradition. Mm-hmm. And there's many institutions that function that way. And so this notion of celibacy and philosophy does have this certain overlap and resonance that I think is more cultural, because it comes out of the Catholic scholastic tradition, rather than it is actually in any way helpful or necessary to thought and intellectualism, because children are often, a great spur to this. So I think she's correct. This is true as a pattern. And in contemporary world, it is also clear that people are more likely to have children if they have resources. And as it becomes more expensive just to live, the number of children people want goes down. Also, the more educated women become, the fewer children they have. So these are, interrelated elements.
Yeah. This is a question that's a personal question for you. The question is, did you read The House of the Intellect before or after you left the university?
Before.
And this is from Tina. Yeah.
Definitely before, but very good question, because it sort of clarified a lot of things I was thinking anyway, and it just sort of gave me a whole bunch of meters that slowly went into the red, right? Like, oh, there, I had sort of a framework widget to ponder about the increasing poison that was coming in, and like I said, for 15 to 18 years, I just really had this unbelievably great position. I mean, I was just part-time, which was helpful because they couldn't load me down with stuff. And I was out in the middle of nowhere, so they never bothered me. And I had all the students that wanted to be there were students who had to want to be. You weren't there by accident. And so I had great students in a great environment. We were very focused on teaching and learning, and I had no administrative interference. And then that slowly started to go away. And it was like, here it comes. Shoot. In some ways, I felt like I was the last, out, because of course, I know a lot of people at universities, and I talked to professors at other universities, and this was not their experience at all. And so I had opportunities to go other places, and I always said, "You've got to be kidding me!" I mean, that would be insane for any number of reasons.
Yeah. You've been giving some prescriptions for how to kind of focus on intellectual pursuits if you're just a regular person trying to carve out time. And this person says, of late, I've been really interested in the masters of ancient cynicism, who valued self-education and living on minimal material means. Do the ancient cynics kind of match up pretty well with the kind of prescriptions you've been giving folks in House of the Intellect?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good comparison. I hadn't thought of it, but it's absolutely true. In part, and particularly the latter half, which is reduced material requirements, and this is sort of that corollary of freedom. So, if you have high material requirements, then you're just reducing your freedom. If you don't have a lot of, like, some people are just born with money, or they have a great job that pays them a lot, they don't have to work so much, and so they don't have to worry about that. But if they decide they want a Lear jet, well, all of a sudden now they have to work harder to get the freedom to do what they want. So one of the things the cynics, the Buddhists, the Hindu, this is sort of a global idea. Many of the Christian monks from the 13th, 14th, 15th century, St. Francis of Assisi, these thinkers recognize, like, if you have, the greater your material needs, just the more time basically you have to fill them. Mm-hmm. And I've tried to do the math on this before, but if you figure that, to live a decent life and have your own home, so I'm not talking be sketchy or anything, you say you need like a $250,000 to $300,000 to get just a place to live. Obviously not in San Francisco or LA or New York, but you can find a little city that has a decent place to live for, say, $300,000, and then you need, say, $80,000 a year on top of that, so that you can live independently and not worry. By the way, Schopenhauer did the math on this because he lived independently, because he lived very, very low material needs. And so he was able to live on this bequest that he inherited for pretty much his whole life, and that freed him up. But if you do the math on that, it turns out that something like 100 million Americans do not need to work.
Mm.
Right. If you look at the savings rate, investment rate, material, blah, blah, you do all the math and you go, yeah, something like a third of the population of the United States is wealthy enough that they don't even have to work at all. But notice, we have no culture that tells us that. We don't have a culture that says, hey, reduce your material needs so that you can free yourself up to paint, or to learn to play the piano, or work on your story writing, or sit in a meadow and watch flowers grow. Whatever it is that sort of is your self-education moment from the cynics. But we do have a culture that tells us a couple of things. One is get more, and it doesn't matter how much you have, right? More is better. And so there is never this moment of personal freedom. There's no amount of money that buys personal freedom if you always think you can get more. And then two, it says if you are in constrained material circumstances, basically you're not a good person. I mean, right? Like, this is poverty, even elective poverty or elective limited material needs. I don't like poverty in that sense. Means you're just not a good person, right? We just know you're not valuable because and two, therefore you're suffering, right? You're doing something wrong. And I'm sure anybody who's listening to this, who's currently feeling strained or has in the past, the message is not subtle that you're not a worthwhile person, that you don't matter, that you're not a serious person. Why should I listen to someone who doesn't make $5 million a year? Conversely, if you're a billionaire, people seem to think we should listen to you on every topic. Right? Again, this is not hard to find, but these tech millionaires and billionaires, they interview them on every subject, and I'm like, they say the daftest things. It's just because they don't know anything. It's like, don't ask me about how to run a tech company. I'll say something ridiculous like, "Oh, give everybody more time off and more books, and that'll be great." Right? I should not be running a tech company, but they should not be interviewed about shit they don't know about. But because they have that resonance of wealth and money and power, then we go, oh, we should take them seriously. And so it's hard for us, back to the original question, how do I take myself seriously when I don't have $100 million in the bank? I haven't been on the cover of Forbes magazine, for God's sakes. And I'm not a number one of something, right? So I have no resonance. So I don't respect myself, and other people don't respect me. Yeah, it's a huge challenge.
Marcia asked a question about there was a TV show in 1978 called Men of Ideas by Brian McGee. And on this show, which was in the primetime slot on national TV, great philosophers would be discussed: Husserl, Aristotle, Wittgenstein. And how did things shift so quickly where just in 1978 that could be possible, and now it's just absolutely unthinkable?
Yeah. And so this is why when cultures change and we're not living in a static society. And another example of this is Leonard Bernstein used to do classical music history and education and examples on national TV, like with symphony orchestras, like, oh, here's how Bach begins a partita. Let's talk about partitas, on national TV. It's just unimaginable. So all kinds of things happened because of lobbying by the telecommunications companies, the TV companies. There were a lot of laws that required educational, historical, and cultural content that be delivered. So if you were going to have a broadcasting license, by the way, the airwaves were free. So like NBC, CBS, the ABC, they got free access to the airways, which is valuable, right? So the government said, hey, we're going to let you have the broadcast rights so you can reach everybody in America. That's a good deal. But you have to do news, and you have to do local programming, and you have to do cultural, educational, and historical programming so that, the medium delivers some quality and some value to the humans. And the big media companies were like, well, that blows, because that's not going to maximize our dollars. And so they decided that they did not want to do that. They wanted to do essentially cheap programming that advertisers like. So again, always important when you think about the media is if you're watching TV for free, which most people are, even when they pay. Now people pay to stream things that have commercials, which just boggles my mind. But anyway, another discussion. The advertisers pay for the programming. The advertisers choose the programming. The viewers don't decide what's going to be on TV. Advertisers do, because they take the programs to big conference halls and big meetings, and they pitch it to advertising representatives. And so advertising execs go, oh yeah, this looks like the kind of show we want to buy ads for. And so then those are the shows that are made and put on TV. And it turns out that most advertisers don't see a show on the life and history of Husserl and go, oh yeah, like Taco Bell, we're signing up for that one, and Cheetos, and and so the most profitably advertisable products, things like Taco Bell or Coke, decide what should be on TV. And so their market is not necessarily interested in these kinds of things. And so the business model, the outlook, and the laws around broadcast TV were all transformed under lobbying. This was just, corporate money paying off politicians.
Wow. The next question is from Lovisa, and it's about universal basic income. So some of your prescriptions for House of the Intellect have been, trying to carve out time not prioritize money for everything or prioritize status with your job. Louisa says, when you were talking about passive income, it got me thinking about universal basic income. What do you think about it? Could it help build the house of the intellect?
Yeah, this is a huge debate. I'm sort of agnostic on it in the sense I would love to see the try. By the way, I'd love to see us run that experiment and see. France, a lot of European countries, including France, have the equivalent of universal basic income because they will give you money just for existing. It's their version of welfare, but just everybody gets it. If you're a citizen, even if you're not a citizen, by the way, it's one of the reasons they get upset about immigrants is because they give them housing. In France, they have to give you housing and they have to give you so much money and they have to give you healthcare and education. Like this is required by law, so they kind of have it. But I can never tell if that is as crucial as people like to work. Back to the original question again, working in the drive-through line. And so it seems to me is that if you can get that with a sense of dignity, then yes. But generally the way welfare and unemployment are done in a lot of countries, United States included, is yes, we'll let you have some money, but what we're going to do is make you really suffer and we're going to try to attack your dignity to get it. Mm-hmm. And there's no trade-off that makes that worthwhile. And so to me, the bigger question is, if I can maintain my personal integrity and dignity and receive benefits, and that's probably good. But I just think people having the opportunity to live inexpensively, but well, and work with dignity is really the equation I lean to. That the notion of not working, because so many great thinkers, writer, everything, artists works. I mean, they had jobs. Sometimes their work was their job, but often they did lots of other things. I mean, I almost, not Rembrandt, who did, oh, shoot. His name just popped out of my head. Not Rembrandt. He's the sculptor and the painter who did the huge frescoes in the Vatican. Michelangelo.
Oh, there you go.
Rembrandt got in my head and Michelangelo just ran out of the building. I apologize for that. Michelangelo was designing like siege fortifications. he was doing work by the way, while the city was under siege. Like this was not like oh, hey, in the theoretical, like, no, the city's being attacked, like help us with our siege. So he spent like a lot of time. And then he was writing. He was very famous during his lifetime, by the way, as a poet. Not just as a painter and a sculptor, although of course he did okay at that as well. And so he's like doing paintings and writing poetry at night while his city is under siege, and he's in charge of the siege fortification. So, I do think that the dignity part is more important than the universal basic income part, but I would love to see that experiment run. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jeremy follows up about universal basic income and says conservative politicians in our country are always going against the idea of the welfare safety net, saying that only jobs create dignity. On the other hand, our culture does encourage laziness during free time, watch Netflix, scroll social media, play video games. And he says, personally, I would love UBI because I think I would spend most of my free time pursuing creative things, and I could take sabbaticals from work without worrying about starving. On the other hand, there are ethical questions about working people paying for non-working people to live. So it's a complex question.
Yeah. So that's why I think universal basic income is such a very interesting concept. But notice that in the United States, most people don't work. Right, which is one of those interesting. They certainly don't work full time. A good number work part time, but a lot of people don't work. So you have the tens of millions of retirees, and you have tens of millions of young people who are in school, and then you have lots of people who could be working who are either unemployed or they choose not to work, stay-at-home parents, or they just don't want to work or they don't need to work. They're sufficiently wealthy, or in other circumstances they don't care. And so when you look at the numbers, actually, it's pretty shocking. It's like it's unusual for someone to have a full-time job. It is more normal for someone not to be in that state.
Mhm.
And in our minds, in our cultural perception, everybody should be in this full-time job, working to get the resources. What happens, though, if people are free to not have to do that? That, to me, is the big question. It's like, oh, for instance, if you make housing very affordable and give people, say, universal health care, then how much do you need to work?
Mhm.
And so is universal basic income that different than people just saying, oh, yeah, if you work 15 hours a week, you can make a living? Again, I mentioned this in another episode where there was a writer who was in Greenwich Village in New York, and he had this walk-up cold water flat that he shared with somebody. So they had a two-room apartment. They both lived there. Cold water, they didn't have hot water, but, and there was a bar on the ground floor, and they each worked one shift a week.
Mhm.
And that paid for the apartment and the food that they needed and the beer they needed to drink, and they were good to go.
Mhm.
So there you go. They worked in the bar that was downstairs. They made enough so they could write and hang out and do whatever they wanted. So, I think part of it is, and this, by the way, conservative politicians often articulate this. They don't just want people to work. They want people to be in an environment where they're forced to work.
Mhm.
And where they have to work very hard so that they don't starve, right? It's more of a threat drive. And to me, this is the real crux of it, is like, oh, can I work 20 hours a week with dignity and achieve what I'm trying to do? Or do I have to work 60 hours a week as a slave just so I don't starve, right?
Right.
It's not work that's the difference, or the income that's the difference. Like the person articulated earlier, like, I'm sure they're making more now doing data entry than they were making at the drive-through, but one had greater dignity, and it's not the data entry.
Mhm.
So I think keeping those distinctions in mind, like I said, when I was in college, I worked at a hardware store. I worked 3 shifts a week, 24 hours, and I rode my bike. I didn't have a car. I lived in a studio apartment. I basically lived on campus. That was it. I didn't have anything. I didn't do anything but go to school, read books, had the library. Life was grand. Loved it. Enjoyed myself immensely. Every once in a while, particularly during the summer, I would make the mistake of going, oh, I have more time. I should work another shift at the hardware store. And so I would work a 4th shift, and oh my God, I would become suicidal.
Mhm.
Like some weird 3 shifts a week, I was happy, did my job, did it well, felt good about it. They paid me. I went away. Life was grand. I tried to work 4 shifts a week, and honest, I would just go back to my boss. Say, I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that. And I did it like 3 times in a row because I worked at the same hardware store for a long time.
Right.
3 summers in a row, I went in and said, I want to work extra shifts. Like, okay. And then I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Don't take me up. Fuck, I cannot do that. I'll kill myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a delicate balance, and universal basic income could be something, but there's a bunch of stuff going on there.
Yeah, it depends how it's delivered, how much, does it make you feel good about yourself, or does it put you in this other category where everybody frowns you? Yeah, so it's a lot.
Yeah. And so there's a couple more questions on House of the Intellect, and then we could choose to either continue on with Red Book or pause and then do that separately. But just wanted to let you know we're getting to the end of House of the Intellect questions. So there were a couple references to the Greek daimon.
Yes.
In relationship to this kind of feeling of that you're describing or that Barzun was describing as the House of the Intellect. Sebastian says, inside myself, there's a universe so vast and void-like, the real self is not the persona. It is the hardest thing in the world to feel reached in the depths of the soul. We try through words, concepts, possessions, hobbies. We try to be accepted and loved through intimacy with the other. But the most important love is the uncompromising trust, intimacy, and love with that real self. Socrates called it the daimon. It is always there inside of you if you can find it whimpering and neglected from years of being overridden by the id, ego, and societal expectations of the persona.
Well, I think that makes a good introduction to the Red Book. I think that's articulated what Jung was on about in there. But yes, the only yes, and this is why integrity and personal dignity really matter, because of that. But two, I struggle with the notion of the real self.
Hmm.
right? As if the person that doesn't interact with other people isn't also a real self, right? And I think that notion is this is the history of it's very clear, although we don't have time to go on here. A lot of this comes from medieval scholasticism, where the isolated monk in the cell was considered to be the model of the true human, because it's when you're alone with yourself that you can talk to God. And that group endeavor, we became very suspicious of group endeavor because it interfered with your ability to access directly to God. So God was inside of you. That's where you found him, and hence that. And so, but I do think when you push too far down that line, what you're saying is that the other part of you is not real. Which I'm always, it seems a weird thing to say. I'm very dubious on that, because it seems very real. Right? You get this in all kinds of mystical texts, or Buddhist texts are good with this too, or bad with this, however you want to think about it, where they articulate that, you had this enlightened experience, and then everything else is just less good. And, that enlightened experience is the real, and everything else is the not real. Which is one way to think about that. Another way to think about that is like the other is real too. These are both real states of being. These are real ways to be. And if you take this rare, exclusive, extraordinary thing and say that's real and everything else is fake, then what you've basically done is given yourself contempt for yourself and most of your life. And I'm, suspicious of that, very suspicious of that, as opposed to embrace yourself and your life in all of its many aspects, in all of its many facets. And the fact that language doesn't particularly well articulate everything that's inside of us, although all of world literature, right? Like, if we could articulate what we really felt, we wouldn't need language, right? That's always I say, language is what we use because we can't communicate. This is sort of Derrida was on about this at great length. But yeah, so I'm very mistrustful. In fact, I think it's sort of a self-defeating concept to say there's this realer version of myself that I want to bring out. I mean, I understand what they're saying, and I do cultivate that and grow that, but it doesn't mean the part that you share with other people is not real. If you're being, unless you're deceiving them, I would say.
And Marcia says, I agree that the house of the intellect is a state of being cultivated from within. I love, we don't choose our masters choose us. Reminiscent of the ancient Greek daimon, I came across through Jung, Hillman, Mead, Bly, and Kostrup, how different life might be if I totally handed over control to my daimon.
Yeah, and by the way, daimon here, I should have mentioned this before, is the Greek. It means spirit or demon, of course, but it means spirit. And so oudmai, which is the Greek word for being, the goal of a lot of Greek philosophy was to be in this state, meant to be possessed by the spirit of life, right? Like bon vivant, like to joie de vivre, right? Like if you're possessed by the spirit of life, and they thought that was cultivated from the inside out, because when you look at the outside world, it's so changeable that we probably want to focus on the inside world as much more positive and generating that, but that the gods would enter into you, and then you would express it out, and hence that notion of the daimon. Yeah, and then trusting ourselves, and again, then trusting the daimon, spending time with it, cultivating and expressing. Again, just as Jung's Red Book. Yeah, this is exactly what Jung is like. Oh my gosh, let's see if we can find that daimon in there and find out what the hell it's doing.
And this is the last question for House of the Intellect.
And I think we'll stop because we're on ways, and we'll do a second one, which will be questions from the Red Book.
Okay, yeah, and there actually are two questions. But so in Patreon, House of the Intellect 3 is already out, and Jack had kind of a not that positive response to it. He said, "I'm going to be honest. I found this particular lecture a bit disappointing. Perhaps that's just my perspective, formerly tech-trained data scientist now seeking to start a small business. So my questions have always been, what is correct to measure? What are the right systems to put in place? What is a good bureaucracy? And although you advise people not to avoid cynicism, by also in the same breath, throwing out bureaucracy and measurement. You throw out the organizational tools that we've learned to manage complexity and acquiesce to the false dichotomy that our options as individuals are either to conform to the bureaucracy or to exit the bureaucracy. I think there is no putting the genie back in the bottle. These organizational tools and ideas that are so crushing are also here to stay because they manage complexity well to a certain extent. You can definitely argue that they're over-applied, and because people aren't thoughtful enough about the values and ideas that underpin these systems, the resulting bureaucracies have become soul-crushing and oppressive. But living in a globally connected world necessitates structure. The truly hard question in front of us is how to improve these structures to affirm the dignity and integrity of those who are in them.
Yeah, okay. So absolutely, yes. I would say yes to all of the above, with the caveat, and I think I did not mean to suggest that we should completely throw out measurement and all data. It's that we've become absolutely spectacularly over-reliant on it.
Mm-hmm.
That which can't be measured doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Those things. And so if you go, okay, what's our goal? Our goal is to have people come to our museum, and your museum is filled with people. What else do you want to measure?
Mm-hmm.
Right? The traditional measure is, look, there's people here and they seem to be enjoying themselves. Right? Why do we need more measurement from there? Mm-hmm. And so I think his question articulates it more clearly, which is to say, hey, I guess I was saying we're fighting back against a vastly overemphasized tradition in our culture, or not tradition now, maybe it is a tradition now, which is the fallacy of measurement, the fallacy of putting numbers on things. And so the question, I think he articulated well, the question is asked is, how do we create large-scale human systems that don't kill us? And it's actually pretty clear how we do this. We just won't, as long as we're beholden to this notion of measurement. And so I can give you just a couple of clear examples of this. It was F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, I'm going to say it's Fitzgerald. I'm pretty sure it was F. Scott Fitzgerald who went to Yale. Gosh dog it. Anyway, famous American writer, I should look this up, went to Yale, and his first year there, he had a job to help pay for his schooling, and his job was to collect the payment from the students. And so when they walked on campus, he sat there with a list of students and a little box to put money and checks in. And when they gave him the money and checks, he would check off their name. And then at the end of the day or his shift, he took the box to the bursar with the list that he had checked off and the cash.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some bureaucracy, right? I mean, but not much. This is not how we do it today, right? Like, this is not one of the great, and if you want to check measurements and stuff, one of the great examples is there's a lot of economic research that has come out to say what you want about the technology revolution that computers have brought about. The one thing there's no evidence is that they've increased productivity. So economists are coming to increasing agreement on the notion that you can't find any productivity increase associated with computers. Mm-hmm. So they collect data, they distribute data, they allow us to have lots more data, blah, blah, blah. But there's like I said, there's just little evidence that they produce a lot more productivity. Or, for instance, the checkout counters, the auto checkouts at grocery stores. Mm-hmm. So theoretically, these are more efficient. And it turns out that they aren't. And so lots of grocery stores and other kinds of stores are taking them out because, for all the problems with bureaucracy and technology and blah, blah. And it turns out that having a person at a register who does it for you is probably a really good way to go. Mm-hmm. And we just seem culturally incapable of accepting that, of saying, let's just leave the people alone and let them get on about their business. So, hey, we've hired some teachers, let them teach. No, we got to measure what the students are doing. Okay, so we're going to measure that. And we got to measure the outcome of the teacher. And we have to measure that against the outcome of other schools. Right. And so it's just this endless process. So the question of how do you create a system in which this inhuman element, this dehumanizing love of technology and data doesn't kill us? I mean, unfortunately, I think it is to just sort of break the addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of things don't need to be measured. We're just not going to know absolutely the outcome. But the subjectivity, we just hate it so much. And so I do agree. I did not mean to suggest that we shouldn't measure things, that we don't have these big systems, that we don't use data at all. I think that would be wrong and silly. But we've gone so far the other way that we need some subjective, some fighting back, I guess I would say. Throw a few Molotov cocktails. So I apologize for being too far in that direction. I did not mean to suggest that we should do no measuring or have no like governing structures. But clearly we've lost our minds on that one.
Right. Yeah, you get in trouble occasionally with the data scientists who go, wait a second, we need some of it.
And we do. And by the way, I think it's fascinating what we can study and what we can know, right? So but what we've done is we've said what we can do, what we can know, the systems that we can create are so amazing and so powerful that we should be able to do that with everything. And it turns out that while it is powerful and amazing in many ways, in many places, in a lot of places, is unhelpful in the extreme.
All right, last question from Austin. Regarding the colleges assigning fewer books because students find them hard to read, in previous generations, was there more of a belief in the value of reading works of literature as part of a college education?
Yes. That's an easy one. Yay. B. No, A. The answer is yes, there was. So it depends on how far back you go. So it used to be that having literature was all of education. If you could read Greek and Latin and you could memorize some important Greek and Latin literary works, then you were educated. Like that was definitive of what education meant. And then they added more specialties like medical, law, okay? But you still had that base of a shared classics. By the way, this was also true in China with Confucianism. You didn't read the Greek classics, you read the Chinese classics, which actually makes a lot more sense because you're in China. Why are we reading Greek and Latin classics in England? Nobody knows. In Spain, in France. But anyway, we're going to roll with that. So they would read in a language not their own. And so now you're part of the educated elite. You read the classics. This is what it meant to be educated in most of the world for most of history. Only in the last 100 years has this widespread belief in specialty evolved. The German education model. You can blame the Germans for this. And as that has evolved and taken off again, particularly in the United States, they've said, oh, well, then why do we need all this literature and philosophy and nonsense? By the way, to still graduate from college or high school here in France. So if you want to go to university, you graduate from the high school higher. There's like an extra year, roughly speaking, one way to think about it. Not really, but kind of. But you're required to study philosophy. Like you can't graduate high school without studying philosophy. This is not an option. And literature, and they want to put more theater back into the educational curriculum so that people are studying more theater to graduate from high school. See, we don't have that in the United States. Like this has gone away. And now we're like, oh, books are nice. They exist, but they don't get you a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, education is not fundamentally supposed to just get you jobs. Is all education just supposed to be vocational?
Mm-hmm.
And that's been the change, because originally education was for free people. The liberal education meant the education of the free, and then you could study what you wanted. And now what we've done is we've turned our attitudes towards education as being almost entirely vocational. And so therefore the question you ask is, does this help me with any prospective job that I might get? And if you say no, then people just don't care, or there seems a silly waste of time.
Right. Well, thank you, Wes, and I'll see you over on the Red Book Q&A.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks to everybody else.